Hi guys, welcome to my channel. So in this video we'll be going over the incremental load. It's a beginner level video, so if you are not a beginner, this video might not be useful for you, but still you can stick around. Maybe just try to brush up your knowledge on incremental load. That is what I had to do when I was asked to present this training or a session. And secondly, if you have not subscribed to my channel, make sure that you subscribe, share and comment as much as possible. Show support, show love. So this channel is all about documenting my learning, and we'll be bringing more and more videos. So without much delay, let's dive straight into the content of this video, where we will be sharing the idea behind incremental load, and we'll be using Azure Data Factory to perform a simple incremental load, not a complicated scenario. So let's look into that.
As you might know, this call or this session would be mostly on incremental load. So let me share my screen before we set the agenda. So we'll be mostly devoting our time on the demo using ADF, Azure Data Factory. How do we accomplish incremental load using ADF? But before that, it's important to understand, what is incremental load and when not to use incremental load. So we'll spend some time in order to see that. And then we'll, as I said, most of the time, or bulk of the time will be devoted on the demo. So let's get started. So let's take off it's important to understand, some real life examples because that gives you the relatability. So let's think of our company itself, and let's think of a scenario that, HR team is the team which is maintaining a list of the employees. And whenever a new employee joins, or whenever an employee leaves, HR is the first team, who will be taking care of that. And then at the end of the month, HR data, or this list of employees data, would be supplied to the payroll team, because of obvious reasons, because they would want to, roll out the salaries and want to stop the salaries where the employees have left. So this is a simple example where the HR team would need to supply data to the payroll team. So in other words, this you can call the source team would be HR, and the team that will be receiving the data would be payroll, which will be the target team. Now, at given point in time, this list should be in sync. And now let's walk through an example where a new employee joins this Winwire team of our company. Let's add that employee and maybe call that employee as John. He has some arbitrary salary. So we have two options here. One is, at the end of the month, the HR team could supply the entire list of these employees to the payroll team so that they can do the appropriate or take appropriate actions. And the second one is, you cherry pick the employees who have joined. For example, in this case, John would be the person who has joined, and they will only be sharing the data for John. So the first case where I spoke about, giving the entire list to the payroll team would classify as a full load, whereas the second scenario where I'm saying that only the data for John would be supplied to the payroll team would classify as incremental load. So if you, look at the literal meaning of incremental, it means that uh, you add on to the current system or the current data. So not only the additions, will also be taking care of deletions. What if the salary of an employee has changed? What can we do in that case? In that case, we'll have to make sure that the payroll team is also aware of that, and they are making those changes. So in nutshell, incremental load is selecting a subset of the data, which will be a new data, and that would go into the target systems. Now it's very important for us to identify how do we select this new data. So there are various methodologies behind that. One would be on relying on some primary keys or keys that would define the uniqueness of records. In this case, we could rely on employee ID had it been a case of just the addition. But what if, let's take an example of update. Let's say that, Kirtana has got a promotion and her salary has increased. Okay, so maybe, some random numbers here. So in this case, you could say that, we could use the employee ID to find out, employee ID of Kirtana to find out that Kirtana's salary has changed and maybe update that. But even before that, the finding out part is difficult because apart from these columns, you don't have any other column. So the challenge here would be, finding out which records have changed and which records have been added. So this is the challenge. So uh, in classic, database methodologies, you could actually join these two tables and find out the records that have changed. But there is something called watermark, where what we do is we will have a date time column or date column, let's say for simplicity, in the source side, and the same column would be there in our target systems. Okay, so if you take this example, let's say this data, the 4 employees that are already there in the target in the payroll with the payroll team were added on 1st of November. Sorry, this would be 1st of November. So this should be copied. And the same would exist here because the data is same. Now John joined our company today, so it's 7th of November today. So this would be 7th. And then Kirtana's salary got updated as of today. I mean, these are just assumptions that we are making to help us understand why we need the incremental load or how the incremental load works. So most of the systems where you want to do an incremental load, you have to identify a watermark column. If this is not there, uh, uh, may I know how many of you are familiar with joins and all that, this equal stuff? Are you guys aware of that? Let's say if we have two tables and you have to find out the records that exist in one table and do not exist in the second table, would you be able to write a query for that? Kiran, Shrikar, Ichal. Has anyone gone through the SQL training before?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So would you be able to find out the records that exist in one table and do not exist in the other table? Have you ever tried that scenario? Okay, if you haven't, no need to worry. So what I meant by what I meant by asking that was, let's say you don't have the date column in your systems. In that case, you could use the the primary key column or the column that identifies the uniqueness of the record. So in this case, this would be employee ID. So you would join these two tables and find out the new records. But if we want to do incremental loading in an efficient manner, it's always good to have a date column. So here you will have a date column in the source side and you will have a date column in the target side. Now, how you have to or how this generally works is you will have to find the maximum date. So first of all, let's try to understand what problem we are solving. We are trying to solve the problem where we want to identify new records. Let's change the color as well as the background color, as well as the updated records. Maybe let's change it to a different one. Let's keep the font same, but change the background color. So our problem statement is, or what we are trying to find out is the new records as well as the updated records. Okay. So one way to do is, first is you first of all find out the maximum, watermark date from the destination side, which is from the payroll side. This will be 1st of November. And then you find out only those records, or you fetch only those records where the date is greater than the max date from your target table. So what would happen is the max date here is 1st November. And if you see here, how many, records of what employees have their date greater than the max date. Let's give it a proper name of modified date. So you can clearly see that John and Kirtana will classify because the date is 7th November, which is greater than this. And then for Kirtana also, the date is greater than this. So these two records will then be taken into the target layer. For John, it will be a proper insert. For Kirtana, it would be an update. So let's not worry about the update cases, because this will qualify as a little advanced topic for you. But for now, just understand on how we can identify the incremental data. So any questions so far before we move on to uh, the the topic of why it is needed and when it is not needed? Okay, I believe everyone has followed this. So when to use incremental load? So you will have, these 3 points. The first one says that the size of the data source is relatively large. Now, in this case, one question that might come in your mind is, since the list is very small, why do we even have to worry about the incremental load? You will be absolutely right in thinking that, because the data here is only 6 or 7 rows. So you can, simply dump this data into the target layer, or you can simply give them a new Excel to the payroll team, and they will discard their existing Excels or whatever they are used to maintain. If they're using, database, they can discard their previous entries and just rely on the new information supplied by the HR team. So this will be, as I said, this will qualify as a full load. But what if you have, hundreds or millions of rows from the HR team, especially in large organizations? In that case, the data volume will be large. So that information you cannot easily, pass it to your payroll team. You would have to, you cannot simply send it over the email. You will have to, find out the records that have changed. So that is where you will have to use the incremental load. And the second one is querying the source data can be slow due to the size of the data. So yeah, so this is again the same uh, point. It is just an elaboration of point number one. Again, if you go back to high volumes of data, let's say you have data going up to GBs. Now, in order to load the GB of data, you would need to have uh, uh, right computing power, but it's not advisable to process all the rows when you have big data or huge data which goes to gigabytes. So this is just an extension of point number one. Third is there is a solid means through which changes can be detected. So if you see here, we could do this change because we had the modified date or the employee ID. Again, just to summarize you guys, if we don't have a modified date, we will take the help of employee ID. If you have a modified date, then we can rely on the modified date. Okay, but what if you don't have these two columns? In that case, it will become very difficult to find out which is a new record and which is an existing record. In that case, you might have to go with full load instead of incremental load. So these are the important prerequisites for us to identify whether we want to go for a full load or an incremental load. Any questions on this one, when to use incremental load on these 3 points? Okay. So let's move on to the other one, the other side of this thing. When not to use incremental load. So one scenario we have discussed here, that if you don't have uh, you know uh, a clear-cut candidate of identifying whether uh, it's a change record or a new record, then you will go for full load. So let's see what we have written here. The size of the data is small. This also we have discussed, that if the size is small, you don't have to worry about choosing between incremental and full. You can simply decide that it would be a full load. And the second one is, there is no easy way of determining which data is new or changed in the source. This we have already discussed. Historical data can be changed even from months or years in the past. This is an important point, so we'll have to understand this. So this particular process will go on for various months. It will go on. Actually, it will happen for every month, because every employee needs to have a salary. So it would have happened in October, it would have happened in September and August. So this incremental load can only work, when the historical information is okay, or is accurate, or is not changing. Let's say, Nikhil's name, there was, some um due to some reasons, Nikhil wanted to change his name. Maybe he wanted to add some, signatures to his name. Okay. In that case, the data at the source site or the HR team would have changed, but the payroll system will still have Nikhil as their name, because they are using an incremental load. So in this case, since the previous data or the past data is also changing, we would rather have HR team giving us the entire list of, the employees, rather than doing the incremental load. So in this case, you would go for full load when there is a probability of, the past data getting changed. So this was one of the examples. And to add to that, let's say you are, processing this data every month, and for some reasons, you got some failures. Let's say the October, month, there were some failures, and you realize that in November, or maybe you realize that in December. So in that case, since the failure occurred in October, there could be chances that the November data would also not be consistent. So then you will have to go back and ask the HR team to give you the corrected version of data for October. You would have to load that first, and then you would be loading November's data and then the December's data. So when you have more probability of failures, then it's good to go for full loads, as well as when the historical data is bound to change, then also you can go for a full load. What's the last point? Probability of data not consistent. So this is what we have just discussed. So actually this should be point number 4. So what we are trying to say here is that yes, incremental load will give you performance benefits, and the speed of the data transformation or load would be faster. But let's not blindly do the incremental load when we talk about the systems. If you have these scenarios, it's better to not to use incremental load, and straight away go for a full load. So these incremental loads, there is a synonym for the incremental load. Sometimes some clients or folks, they call it as a delta load as well. So that is how if you work in a project and somebody is saying a delta load or delta, then means that they're talking about an incremental load. So this usually happens in warehouse projects where you want to maintain the historical information. This might not be required in transactional systems where you only have the front end tied to a back end, but it would be required when there are multiple teams involved, and one team is supplying information to the other team, or there are multiple systems involved. When one system is supplying information to, So yeah, mostly its uses in the data warehouse world. So before we jump on to the demo, any questions, guys? Okay, so let's do the demo. For this demo, we would need an ADF account. I believe you guys are familiar with Azure Data Factory. Can anyone just raise their hand or just raise your hand? Maybe I'll just get to know. Do you know Azure Data Factory and Azure SQL DB? Krishna has raised his hand. Okay, I see three people. Okay, very good. So I think most of you have worked with ADF. For the rest of the team who have not, used ADF, I would ask you or recommend you to maybe, explore it offline. So I think most of you have worked with ADF, so that is good. So for this particular demo, we would need an ADF account and an Azure SQL DB account. And we would be referring to this article taken from Microsoft Team. So what we would be doing is we would identify the new data and loading it into Azure Data Lake or blob storage. Okay. So let's follow or do the demo by following these steps. So let's read the overview first. So here is the high level solution. So what it says is get last watermark lookup activity, get new watermark lookup activity. So you don't have to really, get confused on the language that this team is using. All we have to do is, you just have to uh, connect the dots with this example that I've shared with you. What we would be doing is we would be calculating the maximum, or the last or the latest modified date from the source from the target system. And why do we want to, get the last modified date? So let's say this date is second, this date is third, this is fourth. Can anyone try to, explain why do we have to get the last or the maximum modified date? Okay. So why we need to get the last modified date is because if you don't use the last modified date, there are four candidates here. One is 1st November, 2nd, 3rd, 4th. Let's say we have selected 2nd November. Okay. And they have been similarly, we'll have to modify this for now. Let's say we went for 2nd November, which is not the last date, which is actually the second modified date if you arrange it in, from ascending order. First will be the first one, second, third, and fourth. So when we use 2nd November, now is Nikhil's modified date greater than 2nd November? No. So Nikhil will not qualify. Is Kirtana's modified date greater than 2nd November? No. Kirtana will also not qualify. Is Lokesh's modified date is greater than 2nd November? Yes. So Lokesh would qualify. Is Dharani's modified date greater than 2nd November? Yes. Dharani will also qualify along with John and Kirtana. Now in this case, since the data for Lokesh and Dharani has not changed, their salaries have remained the same, and there is no other change has happened. Why we will still, considering these records? Because we have chosen a wrong modified date. So that is why we say that the date should be the last modified date, or in other words, you can call it as the maximum modified date. So this would change to 4th of November. Because had we gone with 2nd November, we would have picked up records for Lokesh and Dharani. which we don't want because their data, as I said, would remain the same. We only want to fetch John and Kirtana. So that is why we always go for the last modified date from the target side. Okay. So this is how, this is how it works. So in this demo, they have kept this information in a separate table instead of using it in the same table or in the target table. What they're doing is they are keeping this information in a separate table. So let's go to this. So you can see here that it says get last watermark lookup activity, get new watermark. When we say watermark, we are just talking about the date when the record has changed. Delta load data, as I told you, the incremental load will also be known as or called delta load in most of the terminologies in most of the articles. So it says that delta load data between these two watermarks from the source table to the destination. So we just have to find out the delta or a difference between these two dates, and then update the watermark for the delta. Again, important thing is, let's say the John, we have inserted John's record into the target table. Okay. Now your delta or your maximum date would change from 4th to 7th. And then let's say we have new change, which will be coming on 8th. The employee ID would be 6. We can call it as, Michael, and the modified date would be 8th. So you can, call this as a modified date or a created date. Since this is a new record, so this will date would mostly be, known as a created date. So in this case, so once you have inserted John into the target table, you have to again repeat the process. Then you would see, which employee's modified date is greater than 7th November. In this case, Michael will, qualify, and hence Michael will be inserted, and again the date will change. So that process will go on as long as you want to insert new data. So that is why you see this part. Update the watermark for delta data loading next time. So this is what we are doing. So I'm not going to read every sentence here. Let's focus on what we are trying to accomplish. For that, let's straight away jump into the demo stuff. So first, we need to set up our SSMS Studio. I've already got it ready, and what it says is run the following command against your SQL database to create a table. So we will be creating a table. So let's copy this. And we will be creating it inside the independence works table. So we have copied the command. Let's paste it here. So 5 rows got inserted. Let's see how the data looks like. So if you compare this table with the example that we have seen, this will be the HR table or the data that is there with the HR team. Okay, now let's go to that article again. Create another table in your SQL database to store the high watermark value. Let's copy this, paste it here, run this. So watermark table is created. So what the Microsoft article will do, instead of adding the dates here, they will be maintaining a table. Let's call this table as a watermark table. And you will have two columns, table name, watermark. What was the name? Watermark value. So watermark value will be a date time column, I believe. Yes, and the table name would be a varchar. So we can call this as payroll, and this would be based on the situation that we see right now on your screen. This would be 7th November 2022. Let me know, guys, if you're not able to follow this because this concept is important. So again, I'll just try to summarize. Instead of maintaining this watermark column on the target side, they have created a watermark table. And what they're doing is they're maintaining the maximum or the last modified date from the target along with the table name. So that is what they're doing. They're just trying to summarize it. We were doing it when we were doing it, we were just doing the calculations manually. So that's why we had taken this date, but they are storing the data into a table. Again, if you are not able to follow anything, just, let me know. We'll stop and try to solve your questions or answer questions. So this is the watermark table. Now they are inserting the data into the watermark table. So right now, set the default value, how to the name of the source data and this table name is. So maybe they want to insert some random value here. Let's do that. So we have inserted that. No need to look at that, or maybe we can query the table just to see how the value looks like. So this is how it looks like. So the data source table is the name of the table. And right now you can just ignore this value. This is just an arbitrary value. Just for the sake of inserting the data, they have done that. So now they're creating a store proc. So let's create a store proc. And why they want to create the store proc is, if you see this store proc is actually updating the watermark table. Why they want to do is, again, thinking of the same example, let's say we have 7th November here. Let's say Michael's data is inserted into the table. Okay, and we have one more record. Let's call it Ajay, and this date will be actually date of creation. So this will be the date. Now, when we want to insert Ajay's data, we have to first update our watermark value. So prior to this, it was 7th November. Now Michael's data has got inserted, so it will become 8th of November. And with this, you will be able to, pick only Ajay's data. Because what you will be doing is you will be in the source system, you will be doing modified date greater than the watermark value, which is 8th of November. Again, guys, this is very important, this logic. Without this, you will not be able to understand. So please shout if anything is not making sense. So this is done. Now let's get back to our. So that is why we have created this store proc, which after the job is done, this will actually update this table and with the latest date for that particular table. Now we move on to the exciting part of creating a data factory. So let's go and do that. So this data factory's account is already provisioned. I believe all of you will have your own ADF accounts or a shared ADF account, so you can use that. Let's create a new pipeline. Maybe let me maximize this. So all these steps up till 10 is regarding your data factory provisioning. Then we'll have to go to the pipeline UI to create pipeline. So first activity that they want us to add is the lookup activity, and they want us to give this name. So this is what we would do. So let's search for lookup activity. We were able to find it, drag it, maybe just change the name to this one, lookup old watermark activity. Now what they want us to do is, I think they will want us to create a connection with the Azure SQL DB. So we will do that. The link service is Azure SQL. Sorry, the dataset is Azure SQL. Let me, give you an idea of how this looks like. So this is a parameterized dataset where we are saying that the table name have to be specified when you are creating a pipeline. So here our table would be a watermark table. So we can copy the name from here. I've copied the name, and let's give a proper name to the pipeline as well. Incremental load pipeline for incremental load. So we have added or we have configured the lookup activity, the first lookup activity. And now we have to go back and refer to the steps that I listed down. So we have covered up till here. Then we'll have to add one more lookup activity, and we will give this lookup activity another name. We will call it as a lookup new watermark activity. And let's see what they want us to do with this. Select source table for table to specify a query on this. Yeah, so in this case, what they want us to do is they want us to use a query. Okay, so that is what we will be doing. Again, we will be using the Azure SQL here, and the table will remain the same. Sorry, table would change here. Data source, and it would be a query. So what we are saying is, so whenever you're writing a query, a tip for you guys is first try to see whether that query works in the SSMS or not. Just straight away don't copy and paste or write the query in the ADF. First see whether it is working or not. So we can refer to the article new watermark value. New watermark value. We just have to be a little cautious on the case sensitiveness in ADF. Although in most of the occasions it will accept different cases, but especially when you're using a copy data activity in the source side and on destination side, you just have to make sure that the case is correct. So now we will add this query here. Sorry, we need to run this query first here. Let's see what it says. So from this example, you can see here, this all 9, 1, 2, 3, 4. So the fifth record, the last record is gives you the maximum last modified time. So you can see here it is 17,9,586. So it means that the query does not have any issues with it. So we have copied the query here. Okay. Now you've got two lookup activities. So one is querying the watermark table. Again, if we just try to summarize what we have done up till now, one is actually querying the watermark table, which is this, and the other one is querying the max date from the table. So let's think of an example of entering Ajay's record into this table. So based on that, uh, the query will give you this date, and sorry, the query will give you this date, but the watermark value will give you this date because source table is HR table. So in the HR table, you have these two new records, Michael and Ajay. Michael was inserted, but Ajay is not inserted. So the maximum date here, and the maximum date from here would be 9th of November, whereas the date on the watermark value would be 8th of November. So what we would have to do is now, just for inserting Ajay, we would say get us all the records from the source table where the modified date is greater than 8th of November. So that is what we will be doing, which you will just see. So now we have to add a copy data activity. Let's go here and select a copy data activity. Link this to this, this to this. I think they have specified a name for this, or maybe not, but they have specified a query. Enter the following in this source. So yes, go step by step. They say select source dataset for the source dataset field. Select query. We'll go onto the copy data activity. Source dataset again will be Azure. Here we can specify our source table, which was data source table, and then it will be a query. Now we can copy paste the query. So we could paste the query here. Now let's look at the query before doing anything else. Let's look at the query and try to understand what is here. So it is saying select only those records from the source table where last modified time is greater than the max time. So sorry, is greater than the old time, and last modified time is lesser than the max time. So they have added one more, check. Up till here, I believe it will make sense. So what they're doing is they have written a criteria where modify date greater than the maximum or last modify date from target, which is nothing but payroll table. Okay, so this is what they have done. So this is the first part of the equation. And then they're saying the last modified time is lesser than equal to new watermark value. So what is new watermark value here? This would be this would be 179506. So they're saying that it should be greater than the maximum time date, but it should be lesser than the max watermark value, which is 8th November 2022. Or maybe for if it is causing confusions, maybe just forget about this, because this is our first iteration. So this will not come into picture until and unless you have the second iteration. So this is our query. So we have copied here. Now refer to the article. So what does it say in the tutorial sync? So in the select format window, select the format type of your data and click continue. In the set properties, in the set properties window, confirm that is selected. So we have done everything on the source side. Now we have to configure the target side of the copy data activity. So for this one, let's maybe select delimited text, or maybe what have they selected? Select Azure Blob Storage and continue in the new data set. In the select window, select the format type and click continue. Enter sync name plus. In the new link service, go to this. Go to the connection tab of the data sync dataset and do the following. For the file path field, enter ADF tutorial dot ADF tutorial. So which means they are saying that you have to drop the file here. Sorry guys. Okay, maybe let's try to create a new link service. Switch to the sync tab and click plus. Okay. Now what they're saying, blob storage, Azure blob storage, click continue. Select the format type of your data and click continue. Let's say it is delimited. Continue. Enter the select in the enter sync dataset name. So maybe let's call it sync DS7 November. Okay. Go to connection tab of the sync dataset. So here the file path will be this. For the file path, incremental copy, and then click on OK. Maybe let's see which dataset is pointing to. So what is missing here is the container name. So we'll have to see which container to use. Maybe this one. Actually, for that, DS7 November. Let's give our own name here. Delta file. I think this should work. Test project. Containers. Test project. Inside test project, you'll have another folder. Test project. Click on OK. Schema import failed. The required need further container. Not to worry. Maybe let's move out of this. Click on cancel. So we first have to establish the correct Azure Blob account. So since we have too many Blob accounts, we were not able to see which one is correct. So for that, we go to the link service. and see which account we are using. So it is first data lake blob storage. So are we inside first data lake? Yes. So now we can go in here. So this is what happens when you do, on the fly, you are bound to get stuck. So which is good as well. Okay, maybe let's keep it here only. Uh, so we are saying is it has a sample data set, but maybe let's just change the date to delta load file. Okay, we will just see whether this one works or not. So we have added the copy data activity for the file part. Yep. So basically, you don't really have to, give these options when you're creating your target data set. These are added, just to give a proper name to the file, but you can give your own names. So another tip that I want to give everyone is that if you're following an article, just try to implement that article or an implementation in its basic form, in the simplest form. If you're not able to follow anything, you can skip that. So this basically step number 28 actually wants to specify the efficient way of giving the name to the file, but we can probably ignore that. Switch to the pipeline editor by clicking the pipeline and tab name of the pipeline. So now we have to add a store proc. So let's add a store proc and take it here, connect to this. Change its name to store procedure to write watermark activity. So we will change the name. Again, this will be pointing to Azure SQL database. Let's see whether it has that store proc. Yeah. And we have to import the parameters. So I'm just assuming that you have actually worked with all of these, or you have used all of these activities previously. If not, this might not, you might not be able to follow it. So anyways, this video is getting recorded, so you can follow it offline. So this is done. Now we have to add these parameters. So why we have taken this, let's see, break this down, maybe maximize it. So we have a new lookup activity. So once we run the store procedure, once you are running the store procedure, you would want to get the latest value of the or the maximum value of the watermark, watermark for that specific table. And how would you get that? You would get that using this query. And this query is currently sitting in lookup activity, lookup new watermark activity, and hence you are just extracting the output from that. And the table name, how do we capture the table name? Let's see here. Okay, yeah. In the old lookup activity, you will only find table name because we have not specified any query in that. If you see here, in the old lookup activity, we have not specified any query. So you are extracting the old table name from the old watermark column activity. So this is done. Now what we have to do, I think it's time to run. So you could either debug it without publishing it, or you could just publish it first and then debug it. So we are publishing it and then we'll trigger it. Any questions till here, guys?
One question with the parameters, like, can you explain the syntax? Like, how are we writing that at the rate activity and like how are we supposed to write those?
So that's a good question. Click on OK. So there is no defined language from the Microsoft team, which language they're using. So usually what you do is you will get all those parameters or options from your sorry from the out of the box tabs you see below the text box. You will see activity outputs, parameters, system variables, functions, and variables. What we had to do was we actually invoked this first activity, and then so this is something that you will learn while when you use ADF more often. So in this particular one, in this particular look example, we were using lookup activity where by default the first row only would be marked, which means that we are only interested in the first row of the output. And you might also see here that this query is also returning us a single value. So we are not interested in knowing the data that has more than one rows. We are only using it for the first row. So, and this syntax will change once you use different, or once you call different, what do you call, uh, activities, this will change. But for lookup activity, you will have to add, or you will just have to invoke the activity first, and then you just, add the first row and then the name of the column. So what was here would see output first row. The name of the column was new watermark value. And the second case, there was no query, but we were using the table, and that's why you would using table name. Now there could be situations where you're adding some, system functions. So one thumb rule is that you cannot have more than one at the rates. You cannot have an intermediate at the rate here. So for example, what I'm trying to say is, even if you add any other activity, or if you try to invoke any other activity, you see at the rate automatically disappears. So the at the rate is only required at the start. Yes, this would be challenging. There is no defined or predefined rules on how this syntax works. It will just come with experience. One pro tip would be, whenever you're using functions, let's say you want to use a date function, just try to hover over it and it will give you an example of how to use it. Maybe, yeah. Oh, it's not giving. Yeah, I think they have added examples here only. Uh, let's go with the conversions. You see here, you find the examples at the very end. Okay, you'll find the examples at the end. Yeah, this will come from experience, as I told. But for the lookup activity, if you're using a first row, this is how you write. And another thing is, when you are running this, that again would be an advanced concept. I was just thinking out loud, because what happens is this all under the hood is a JSON. So if you look at the code behind it, you will see that this is all JSON. So once you get more, experience with using ADF, even if you're not able to find out the syntax, you would be able to, get the exact syntax by looking at the JSON. So you will have lookup new activity followed by, the value followed by so on and so on. And that is how you can, establish that. For example, in this case, this new lookup activity, you will have output. Output is not shown here because you have not executed it. But let's look at the other lookup activity. Here you have, sorry, the table name, and that is what we are using here. So you see this table name. But yeah, that was a good question. But unfortunately, Microsoft has not given us, predefined rules which we can take the help of. They have definitely given us the examples which we can explore. Okay. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Now let's try to run this. And with that, we will just wind it up. We'll connect tomorrow again just for a follow-up session. But let's see whether this is successful or not. So the expectation is a file should be generated and that should be kept inside a blob storage. Since we are running this file for the first time, I think it will give us all the records. Why? Because we have supplied this date as the the watermark date, and this date is lesser than all of these dates. And again, going back to our example that we have been studying so far, it should give us all the records. But let's see what happens. So let's go to the monitor tab. So the file has run successfully. That's good. Go to the container. Hmm. Rules written 5. Very good. So what was the name of the folder that we created? Does anyone remember that? Sync. Yeah, it was inside test. Was container. Okay, inside test. Delta load file. So this was the name of the file that we had given. Delta load file. Let's quickly open this. Where the data is small, we can view this here itself. So you can see that the result was as expected. It has uploaded or loaded all of these records. Because why? Because we had supplied the watermark date as some random value from 2020. Now, since we had also had the store proc, this date would now change to this one, 9/5/2017. Let's see what is there in the watermark table. See, the date has changed. Why? Because we are calling a store proc at the end. That would change it. So we'll be wrapping up here. So I will be setting up one more session tomorrow, and you guys please go through the recording, do the demo. So one part is still left. That is that we will insert more records into our target table, sorry, source table, and we'll see whether only the new records make their way to the output file or not. So what we would do is maybe we'll have some records like FFFF, GGGG, and in the output file, you will only be able to see these two records. So yeah, and if you have any questions, we'll take it tomorrow and come up with more questions. So I wish you all the best then. Thank you guys. Thank you for joining. So just a recap of what we did yesterday. We actually tried to understand what is incremental load, under what circumstances or scenarios we would need the incremental load, and why the incremental load might not work in some other scenarios. And then we looked at how we can implement an incremental load using ADF. So we were able to load the data for the first time. We had configured the ADF pipeline and we were able to load it for the first time. I know you might not have gotten a chance to try it out, but just checking, any one of you try out the demo, whatever we had covered yesterday? Were you able to try that out? Maybe you can raise your hands if you have tried it and it might or might not have worked. Okay, so I see Sarika raising her hand. Sarika, so were you able, Sarika, Divya, were you able to uh, go as far as we did yesterday? Did you face any issues?
I'm getting an error.
Oh, which error?
It's saying that table didn't exist.
Sorry, it's showing.
Can I say this again?
Yeah, yeah, please go ahead. Stop sharing. Yeah. Okay, so watermark value does not because I will put a person ID. So let's look at your lookup activity. Can you go to your old lookup activity? You have to go to, yeah, yes, right. So go to the settings, please. Azure SQL DB. So can you open this data set on the right side? Yeah, open that data source table. And no, this should be pointed to the watermark table, not the data source table.
Okay.
So yeah. So the idea is the old lookup activity table will point to the watermark table, and the new lookup activity will point to the data source table from where we will try to get the max load date or the latest modified date. It's actually modified date, not the load date. So that was the idea. But yes, yeah, I think you're going in the right direction. So maybe after following today's session, you can complete that. And I would encourage the rest of you as well. Just go through that. You can parallelly play the video, do the demo, or start doing the demo yourself, and then things will be more clear. So yesterday we were able to insert the data into the table, and if you see here, let me just connect to that table. Sorry, database independence works. If I query this, you see here we have all the records mostly in September. The latest one is from 5th of September. And let me open the file. And we saw in the file that all these records were visible. Why? Because in the watermark table, we had kept the date as 2010, which is 7 years before the date that you see. So that means all of these records will qualify. And the query that we'll be using is this query. So one thing I just want to tell you is that you can probably ignore the second part of this query. This could be misleading or confusing if you're just doing it for the first time. If we compare this with what we used yesterday as an example, so we were all the time we were saying that we have to get the maximum date or the latest date from the payroll table, which as of this example is 8th of November. So this was one condition, but they have added one more condition. They are saying that the date should be lesser than the maximum date in the source table, which is lesser than equal. I think lesser than equal to the maximum date from the source table. As I said, you can for now, even if we remove this part, our logic will work because we don't really have to worry about what's going on at the source side. We only have to see, fetch us only those records which are new. And how do we identify that? We identify with the help of the modified date or the watermark value. So if you look at this, this is old watermark value. Old watermark lookup activity points to your watermark table, and new lookup activity actually points to your source table. So here you will have 8th November, if you look at this example, and then here you will have 9th November. So your query becomes, if you have to, write it on an Excel, maybe we can write it here. So your query becomes, since our source table is HR table, we'll write the HR table where last modified date, we don't have last modified date, but we have modified date. So we can change it here. Let's remove this. Greater than. So lookup old watermark activity is actually this value, because this is the watermark table. So we will replace it with 8 November 22, and then we have last modified date again. We need to replace it with modified date, and then this is the new lookup activity which points to the source table. In our case, the source table is HR. So what is the maximum date in the HR table, which is 9 November 22. So this is how our query looks like. So this is how our query looks like. So if you query this table based on the data that you see here, maybe let me put all this in a single line or side by side. This would be 7. So this is our source table. So once you fire this query on this source table, you will only be able to get this record, Ajay's record, because all the other records or the employees, they have modified date lesser than or equal to 8th November. Only Ajay has a date of 9th November, which actually will qualify in the second condition. Again, even if we remove this, we'll still be getting Ajay as the output, but I think they have added one more layer of check, which to be honest, in practical scenarios, as far as my experience goes in the projects, we actually don't need it. So that was the one thing that I wanted to show you. So now what we do is we will insert some rows in the source table, and the expectation should be only the new rows should make it to the output file. So let's see what this article says. So they are saying add more data to source. So we'll copy this and we'll go to our query window. We'll add 2 more records. Okay. And now now they are saying trigger pipeline again. Now let's see, sorry, I keep going to the wrong window. Sorry for that. So now we need to just rerun the pipeline and see if it works fine. So we will trigger it. Trigger now. And once it runs, we'll go to the monitor tab. So these were successful. I think the copy activity should have started. Let's also check, meanwhile the pipeline is running, let's also check what is going on in the various activities. So first, let's check the lookup old watermark activity. Now, based on our expectation, the old lookup activity should give us the last maximum date prior to running this pipeline, which was 9/5/2017. Let's see whether that is true or not. That is indeed true. So it is giving us 5th September 2017, which is the last lookup activity, sorry, last value for the watermark column. Now this is lookup new watermark activity, which actually is connected to the source table. And this should give us the max load or max last modified date. So we had inserted these two rows. Let's do one thing. Let's just run the query. Now this is how the table looks like. So here you can see we had inserted this as the new data. In the name, you can see new data as one of the names. So the expectation is the new lookup activity should return us 2017 9/7. Why? Because we have fired a query. So first of all, we are querying the source data in the new lookup activity, and then we have written the query like select max of last modified date from this table. I will go to the new lookup activity and see what is the output. So it is 9/7, which is also true or also as per the expectation. And let's see what is going on in the copy data activity after that. Let's refresh it. So we are not straight away, opening the file. We are trying to understand what has actually happened. So this is very important, when you run into any errors and issues. So it's important how you debug the ADF activities, how you check whether the operations were successful or not. So for this, what we do is, since we know we have only inserted two new rows, so somehow at the back of your mind, you should expect, the copy data activity to give you a result similar to that. So there is a metric over here that says rows read, rows written. So you can see here it has only read two rows because of the query that we have used. And not only that, you can actually, I think, get the query. So this is how the query looks like. And you put it in the SSMS window just to make sure that you are able to understand what is going on. So it is querying the data source table where last modified date is greater than that and last modified date is lesser than this. Okay. And this is similar to what we did here. In this case, the date was 8th November. One of the dates was 8th November and the other one was 9th November. We are not using time here, but here we are using time as well. So the date is 5th September and the other date is 7th September. And these two dates are coming from your two lookup activities. So this query gets converted into the, maybe we can just write this. So this entire query gets converted into this when you debug it, because this is an expression. This is also an expression which will get the value at the runtime. So everything looks good. Now let's go to the output and see whether we are able to get the file or the accurate file. So I think this was the container test folder. The file got created today before just at 12:42, which is 5 minutes from now. Let's try to view this file. Yes, so it is working as per the expectation. You see new data here. So it means only the incremental data has been moved into the output file. So now with this help, with this data, you can actually insert it into the target layer. So this could be an intermediate layer. You can call it as intermediate layer. or what what I'm trying to say is, what we have done in ADF is we are able to identify the incremental loads, but we still have to insert those rows into the target table. So you can take it as a follow-up exercise. What you can do is create another table which and call it a data target table. So create another table and call it as a data target table. Have the similar structure. Schema should be same. Okay, and then try to insert. So first of all, try to insert the data that is there in the source table to the target table, and then in the pipeline itself, using the incremental data, make sure that only the new data gets inserted into the target table. So you can take this as a follow-up exercise. So once you are done with this demo, then you can take this as a follow-up exercise. Maybe let me just document this. Create target table, data target table. I think that was the name. Yes, with same schema. Update the pipeline to insert records into above table. Okay, so this is an added, you can say, some added work for you that will actually help you in understanding this in a concrete manner. So what else is left in this article? Let's read that. So yeah, so this is done. Or maybe what you can do is you can just follow this, as the next steps around the pipeline. So what they're saying is you perform the following steps in this tutorial. Recommended content. I think they're not saying what to do next. They're just trying to summarize it. So yeah, just ignore this and do this part. Create a new table that will be your target table. And what we have to do is when the pipeline runs for the first time, all the source records should go into the target table, and then only the incremental record should go into the target table. So we have not discussed the updates and the deletes because that would qualify as an advanced topic. Only we are only we are only interested in knowing the new data, or identifying the new data and then inserting that data into the target table or onto a source file or onto a random file that we just saw here. So any questions on this, guys? Were you able to understand what we did? Maybe if you have not understood or followed, just raise your hand. Okay, so I hope everyone has followed it. So the recording will be available, so you can go through both the recordings, one after the another, or you could refer to the first recording, or maybe a part of first recording, take some break, and then do the other part, and then this recording. And you can reach out to me offline if you get stuck. I would be more than glad to help you. If there is nothing else, we can wind this up. Anyone has any questions?
Hello.
Yeah, Shikhar.
Thank you, Lokesh. I think most of our doubt has been cleared.
Okay, very good. Yeah, just
Happy
try it
birthday.
out. Thank you. Thank you.
Happy birthday.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, guys. So we'll connect soon. So I wish you all the best. Enjoy your day. Thank you.
Thank you. Happy birthday.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.